She came at me with a clipboard, a dress that had lost a fight with a mud puddle, and a voice that could curdle paint. Her opening line, "That tree goes or you go." Within 48 hours, I had 7 fake violations, no power, and neighbors whispering I was a corporate infiltrator. All because one woman declared war on my sycamore. I had barely killed the engine on my pickup when a voice screeched through the trees like a banshee with a megaphone. "Section 3.9 violation, that tree goes or you go." I turned, coffee still hot in my hand, to find a woman stomping across a gravel drive like the earth owed her rent. She was wrapped in a mud-splattered floral dress that looked like it had been through 3 yard sales and a wind tunnel, clutching a clipboard like it was the holy constitution of Birch Hollow Lake. Her face was flushed, hair frizzen, bouncing with each furious step, and her eyes locked on me like I'd just keyed her Prius. She jabbed her finger toward the massive sycamore that shaded my front porch and snarled, "You've got 48 hours to remove that unauthorized eyesore or face a $750 0 cents fine and HOA suspension privileges, including your boat access." I hadn't even unpacked my suitcase. I blinked. "Excuse me?" was all I managed. She was already waving the clipboard in my face like a TSA agent on a power trip. "It violates the aesthetic integrity of our lakefront community. All trees visible from the shoreline must be pre-approved native species." I glanced at the sycamore, thick trunk, healthy canopy, planted by my father in '78, according to the plaque beneath it. "I don't think I agreed to that," I replied calmly, trying not to laugh at the absurdity. "I'm Greg Morgan, just moved in. This cabin's been in my family for 3 generations. She didn't flinch. "Rules are rules, Mr. Morgan, and I don't make exceptions for sentimentality. Birch Hollow is not a botanical experiment. It's a legacy community." She pronounced legacy like it had a trademark symbol after it. I kept my voice level. I reviewed every document before signing the purchase. There wasn't a clause about tree species or boat privileges being conditional. Her eyes narrowed and she raised one perfectly penciled brow. "Perhaps you didn't read the supplemental packet. Appendix D, 3. Karen Brewster, HOA president." Of course. Her name was Karen. She extended the clipboard like a challenge coin, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in neon pink. "No non-native trees may be within visual range of lakefront properties." The text looked like it had been printed from a Word doc in Comic Sans. I took a sip of coffee and fought the smile creeping in. "Do you have that in the original signed agreement?" I asked. Her lip curled. "It's not my job to educate you, Mr. Morgan, but ignorance doesn't exempt you from consequences. Welcome to Birch Hollow." As she turned to storm off, heels sinking into the gravel with each indignant stomp, she paused to speak with a man in a silk blazer standing beside a black Cadillac at the edge of the lake. She gestured wildly toward my cabin, clipboard in the air like a traffic baton. He didn't look like a resident, more like someone who thought real estate mogul should be printed on business cards in gold foil. I watched as he nodded, glancing briefly at the sycamore and then at me. Something about the exchange triggered a slow burn in my chest. Karen wasn't just mad about a tree. There was something more, something transactional. That evening, I sat on the porch swing, boots kicked up, watching the sycamore's branches sway in the lake breeze. The sun was bleeding orange across the water, and I found myself clenching my jaw, staring at that tree like it was the last thing holding the cabin together. My dad carved our initials into its trunk when I was 10. He built the bench around it the summer before his stroke. And now some clipboard queen with a mud-drenched power complex was telling me it didn't fit the aesthetic. I wasn't looking for trouble when I moved here, but trouble, it seemed, had a clipboard, a Cadillac contact, and a name tag that read president. The next morning, the sycamore stood untouched, the bench beneath it damp with early dew, and the lake stretched out behind it like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Birch Hollow didn't let things go that easily. As I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand again, I noticed something off. The air had that weird silence to it, like the pause before a lightning strike. Then I saw it. My power box, mounted beside the cabin, had a bright red tag slapped across it. Electrical access temporarily suspended, inspection required. Below that, a note in fine print, by order of Birch Hollow HOA. My cabin, the only one along the shoreline, was completely dark. The neighbor's porch light across the inlet was still glowing cheerily. Coincidence? Not a chance in hell. I fired up the backup generator I'd brought for emergencies, the kind you only really need when the grid goes down during a blizzard. This wasn't that kind of emergency. This was personal, and it wasn't subtle. As the generator kicked in, I caught movement near the community dock. Karen stood under the birch archway, arms folded, her signature floral dress replaced by a neon tracksuit that looked like it had been stolen from a retired figure skater. She was flanked by two men with tool belts and clipboards who pointed toward my property like they were casing the joint. One of them raised a phone to take photos, pretending to inspect a non-existent fire hazard. I waved. Karen turned like I'd just mooned her and walked off briskly, heels clicking like a metronome of self-righteousness. That afternoon, I headed to the general store in town for supplies and maybe a hint of normalcy. No dice. As soon as I walked in, two people stopped talking mid-sentence. Another lady grabbed a cart and speed-walked away like I was contagious. I overheard someone whisper, "Lakeshore plant," followed by a snort. I didn't know what that meant until Rachel caught up with me in the baking aisle and muttered, "Karen's been telling people you're a corporate scout sent by Lakeshore Villas, that you're here to ruin Birch Hollow's character so it can be bought up." I stared at her, incredulous. "Are you serious?" Rachel nodded grimly. "She's spreading it like wildfire. Says you're the tree spy, and people here, well, they'll believe anything with enough clipboard drama behind it." By nightfall, my mailbox contained a thick envelope stamped with HOA lettering. Inside was a formal violation escalation notice claiming my generator violated noise thresholds and that I owed an emergency infrastructure assessment fee of $1,100 due in 7 days, or property lien procedures would begin. The language was so thick with legal cosplay, it could have come from a LARPing lawyer. I sat down with a beer and reread the letter twice, more amused than angry. But buried in the jargon was a clear tactic: apply pressure until I snapped or packed up. What Karen didn't know was I'd spent years on construction sites with unions, inspectors, and regulators breathing down my neck. I wasn't built to buckle under a poorly formatted threat from a self-appointed queen of shrubbery. I spent that night reviewing every page of my property packet, zooming in on land boundary PDFs and surveyor signatures. Something didn't sit right with the way Karen moved. Too confident, too rehearsed, and the timing of the power cut, the gossip, the inspection guys, it was too clean. If this was about a tree, it wouldn't feel like a full-blown operation. Somewhere in the paperwork, I spotted an old land code reference I hadn't noticed before, something tied to parcel 17B, my property, but with the strange clause about administrative oversight dating back decades. It was a thread, and I intended to pull it, because if Karen wanted to play HOA hardball, I had a feeling she just walked into a game she didn't know I'd already played, and won. The next morning, I skipped the coffee and went straight for the records office. If I was going to beat Karen at this game, I needed more than stubbornness. I needed paperwork. The municipal building in Birch Hollow looked like it hadn't been dusted since Nixon was president. A clerk named Darlene, whose reading glasses dangled from her neck like a sheriff's badge, raised an eyebrow when I asked for anything related to parcel 17B and HOA charter documents. "That's a popular one lately," she muttered, shuffling off into the back. A few minutes later, she returned with a box that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Cold War. "This is all we've got. HOA stuff's usually filed under voluntary community associations, not municipal charters, so take it with a grain of salt." I took it with both hands. Back at the cabin, I laid everything out on the dining table. Among brittle blueprints, handwritten ledgers, and decades-old community meeting notes, a few things jumped out. One, there was no official registration of the Birch Hollow HOA as a legal governing body. Two, the original community association back in the 70s had been voluntary and dissolved due to internal conflict. Three, a line in the margin of a deed transfer, written in smudge pen, noted that parcel 17B retained full exemption from any future community-imposed regulation unless a supermajority of active, documented property owners voted otherwise. In other words, my land was HOA Teflon untouchable unless 75% of owners signed off. And something told me Karen didn't have that kind of support, or at least not legally. That suspicion was confirmed later that afternoon when I got a surprise visit from Thomas Rayner. Thomas was pushing 70 with the wiry energy of someone who used to shelve encyclopedias for fun. "Heard you've been poking around," he said with a smile. "Figured you'd want this." He handed me a faded manila folder labeled HOA Charter 2004 Revision, Unofficial. I asked. Karen drafted it herself, claimed she had majority backing when most folks were out of state or didn't even know they were on the list. My wife and I never signed. Neither did the Mendez family or the Lowells. It's all smoke. I flipped through it. Sloppy formatting. No municipal stamps. Names typed in different fonts. It wasn't just shady, it was amateur hour. We sat on the porch talking while the sun dipped behind the pines. Thomas told me about the great landscaping revolt of 2012 when Karen first arrived and tried to mandate lawn gnome-size regulations. No one took her seriously until a few older residents passed on, a few moved away, and suddenly the loudest person with a clipboard had the only voice people heard. She started calling herself President, Thomas said, then made herself a logo, then a Facebook group. Next thing you know, she's issuing fines like Birch Hollow was some kind of gated empire. People went quiet out of exhaustion more than fear. I nodded slowly. But now she's trying to force me out because of a tree and a made-up rule book, Thomas chuckled. She sees that tree like a crack in her dam, and you're the flood. As he left, he leaned in a little. One more thing. Wyatt Fenton, the guy she's always whispering with at the dock, he's not just a realtor. He's part of a shell company called Hickory Ridge Holdings. They've been sniffing around here for months, looking to buy up shoreline property for some kind of eco-resort. My guess? Karen's helping them clear the way, one tree at a time. That little revelation was gasoline on an already roaring fire. I waited until he disappeared down the gravel road, then opened my laptop and started searching. And there it was. Walmart just 6 months ago with the Vermont Business Registry. Hickory Ridge Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Karen L. Brewster. The moment I saw Karen's name listed as the registered agent for Hickory Ridge Holdings, something inside me shifted. Everything snapped into place. The fake inspections, the gossip, the sudden avalanche of fines. It wasn't about a tree, it was about leverage. She didn't just want me out, she needed me gone. My parcel with its private lake access and unobstructed shoreline view was the crown jewel, and Karen, ever the clipboard dictator, was trying to flip it for profit while hiding behind her self-invented authority. I scrolled through the filing details again, noting the listed business address, a P.O. box tied to a strip mall 2 towns over, classic shell game. But I wasn't planning to play along. I was planning to flip the table. That night, I checked the footage from my security cameras. Motion alerts had pinged 3 times while I was with Thomas. I watched as a man in a generic blue uniform snuck around my fence line, clipboard in one hand, crowbar in the other. He paused, glanced over his shoulder, and cracked a plank in half, then took photos of the damage. The boldness was cartoonish, but the intent, serious. 3 hours later, a notice had appeared on my front door citing me for hazardous perimeter violation and demanding $2,000 0 cents in aesthetic remediation. I saved the video, backed it up twice, and sent a copy to a lawyer friend in Boston with the subject line that read, "Your favorite kind of HOA hell." His reply came 10 minutes later. "Let me know when you want to sue. This is performance art." The next day, I got a knock on my door from Curtis Mendez, the boat dock supervisor. Older guy, built like an oak stump, always smelled like lake water and black coffee. "Heard what happened," he said, nodding toward the broken fence. "You're not the first." He handed me a stack of old HOA notices, all issued within a 3-month window last year, all citing vague violations like unauthorized mailbox style or unlicensed grass species. Most were to properties later sold to Hickory Ridge. Curtis lowered his voice. "Karen gets a kickback for every lot they acquire. Doesn't matter if she has to lie, bully, or fake a plumbing emergency. This place used to be quiet. Now it's just her stage." I thanked him and scanned the notices. Every address had one thing in common. They bordered the water. Later that afternoon, I visited the one person I hadn't spoken to yet, Meredith Lowell. She worked at the local bank and, according to Thomas, had started asking questions after Karen tried to push through a community development loan without full board approval. I found her near closing time, nervously arranging deposit slips. When I introduced myself, her eyes flicked toward the security camera. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at the coffee shop on Harbor Street. I'll bring what I can." As I turned to leave, she added quietly, "Be careful. Karen's been monitoring accounts, mine included. I walked out with my pulse pounding and 1,000 thoughts colliding. Meredith was scared, and that meant we were close to something big. That evening, as the sun bled orange over Birch Hollow, I sat on the porch again. Same bench, same sycamore, only now it felt less like a tree and more like a chess piece. I opened my inbox and found an anonymous message. Please consider relocating from Birch Hollow for your own safety. We know what you're really doing. Attached was a blurry screenshot of me at the general store. Zoomed, cropped, timestamp. Creepy, but clumsy. I traced the IP. Community center Wi-Fi. Karen wasn't just escalating, she was getting sloppy. And tomorrow, if Meredith delivered what I thought she would, we'd have more than just gossip. We'd have receipts. And the one thing Karen couldn't fake was math. The next morning, Birch Hollow looked calm on the surface, like a snow globe before someone gives it a good shake. I arrived early at Harbor Street Coffee, grabbed a seat by the window, and waited. At exactly 10:02, Meredith Lowell walked in, shoulders hunched, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She ordered a tea, sat down across from me, and slid a manila envelope under her scarf like we were passing nuclear codes. I only have a few minutes, she said quietly. These are internal statements. HOA account activity. They're not supposed to be printed, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I opened the packet and scanned the pages. Line after line of expenses labeled beautification, infrastructure upgrades, and consulting fees. But the routing numbers led to one of two destinations, Karen L. Brewster's personal account or Hickory Ridge Holdings. I looked up. Meredith's hands were trembling slightly as she stirred her tea. Karen asked me last month to backdate a meeting note, she said. Said it was just a formality to authorize a special assessment. When I hesitated, she reminded me my mortgage was still under community review. She let out a shaky laugh. It wasn't subtle. I nodded, sliding the papers back into the envelope. You've done more than enough. I'll take it from here. She stood to leave, but turned back. She's calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight. Didn't send you a notice, but I think it's about you. I wasn't surprised. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. She was the type to throw her clipboard like a ninja star and call it due process. I arrived early at the community center that evening, took a seat in the back, and waited. Residents trickled in, many glancing at me with a mix of caution and curiosity. Karen swept in 10 minutes late, dressed in her classic floral battle armor and dragging a rolling file cabinet behind her like she was preparing for trial at The Hague. At the front, she stood behind a folding table, slapped her gavel, yes, she had a gavel, and announced, "This is an emergency procedural meeting for HOA members in good standing. Mr. Morgan is present as a courtesy observer only." I smiled politely, resisting the urge to respond with something unprintable. Karen clicked to a projector slide showing photos of my cabin, a zoom filtered and with ominous red circles around my fence, generator, even the sycamore. Lot 17, she intoned, has committed multiple willful violations designed to destabilize our property values and community trust. I raised my hand. Quick question, Madam President. Before we dive into your PowerPoint of doom, can you clarify exactly which legal statute gives this HOA the authority to levy fines or enforce property seizures? She blinked just for a second, but it was long enough. The community voted on our governing documents in 2004, she said. All authority derives from those bylaws. Interesting, I replied, pulling out my own copies, because I spoke to 5 residents listed as having voted and none remember seeing a ballot. Also, this document doesn't bear a municipal stamp or registration ID. It wouldn't hold up in a homeowner mediation panel, let alone court. A few heads turned. Murmurs spread. Karen tightened her jaw, voice raising. "You're twisting facts. You're not even from here." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I simply turned my laptop toward the crowd and hit play. The video of the inspector breaking my fence played in perfect HD. Then the screenshot of Karen's shell company registration, then a simple pie chart I'd made showing the HOA's collected fees versus actual visible improvements. A $94,000 0 cents black hole. By the time the projector was turned off, the room was dead silent. Karen stood frozen, fingers clenched white around her clipboard. But it wasn't over. A slow, creaky voice broke the silence. Old Mr. Kessler from Lot 6. So you've been charging me for lakefront pathway improvements that never happened while funneling cash to your side hustle? His voice was dry but sharp as broken glass. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but this time no one was listening. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out, just a high-pitched wheeze that sounded like her ego trying to reboot. Her clipboard, once wielded like a weapon, now dangled uselessly at her side. The room had shifted, not just in mood, but in energy. People were leaning forward, no longer bored or intimidated, but curious, angry even. Mr. Kessler adjusted his hearing aid and added, "I thought that path was just a rumor." Someone near the back snorted. Another voice chimed in, "She fined me for non-compliant shutters last year, said mine were too coastal. What does that even mean in Vermont?" Karen spun toward the crowd. "Enough. This meeting is not a witch hunt." But her voice cracked halfway through, and the silence that followed wasn't sympathetic. It was hollow. I stepped forward, not to gloat, but to guide the conversation. "Look, nobody moved to Birch Hollow to get caught in HOA warfare. We came for peace, for the lake, for a place where we didn't have to worry about surprise inspections or manipulated votes." I paused, then held up a copy of my deed. "And here's something else I haven't mentioned yet. My parcel 17B is exempt from HOA authority under a grandfather clause dating back to 1974. It can only be governed by HOA regulations if 75% of all active owners agree in writing. I've checked. That never happened." I let that settle a moment before continuing. "So every fine issued to me, null and void. Every threat of seizure, illegal. And if it's happening to me, it's probably happening to others." That's when Rachel stood up from the third row. "Karen told me last fall my rain barrels were a rodent hazard. Charged me $400, 0 cents. Said if I didn't pay, she'd escalate." Then Thomas raised his hand. "She rewrote the rules on mailbox height 3 times in 1 year. I paid for new posts twice." One by one, voices emerged from the crowd like a collective exhale after holding breath for too long. Karen backed up a step. "All these were within reasonable bounds. I've protected this community, maintained standards. I've kept property values high." Her tone turned shrill, desperate. "Everything I've done for Birch Hollow." She looked around as if waiting for applause, but no one clapped. Instead, Meredith stepped forward and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You did it for Hickory Ridge Holdings, not a—" Karen's eyes snapped to her. "You're lying. That was private." "Not anymore," Meredith cut in. She held up the packet of financials I had shared with her, copies of transfers from the HOA's account to Karen's personal fund and from there to Hickory Ridge. "You used our community fees to bankroll your side business, and you tried to sell us out." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in clarity, voices overlapping, neighbors comparing stories, realizing they'd all been played. Karen reached for her gavel, as if whacking the table might reset the last 15 minutes. But the authority that gavel once carried had evaporated. "This is mutiny," she snapped. "This is an illegal meeting. None of this counts." I met her eyes. "Funny. That's exactly what we've been saying about your HOA." She stormed out, clipboard clutched like a sinking ship's wheel, but not before turning back at the doorway. "This isn't over," she hissed, eyes darting like a trapped raccoon. "You people have no idea what you're unraveling." And just like that, she was gone. The door slammed shut behind her, rattling the framed community values poster on the wall. Mr. Kessler shook his head and muttered, "Might want to update that." I turned to face the room. "We have work to do, starting with forming something real, transparent, legal, and fair, a homeowners group that doesn't act like a royal court with garden shears." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. But as residents began talking and comparing notes, Curtis leaned in and whispered, "You just cracked her shell. But trust me, Karen's not done swinging." Curtis wasn't wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find my cabin covered in neon violation notices, at least 8 of them taped across the siding like HOA wallpaper. One accused me of having unauthorized window coverage. Another claimed my fence exceeded the aesthetic height threshold. There was even one that cited my mailbox as aggressively geometric. They were all backdated to give the illusion of due process. I stood there barefoot, coffee mug in hand, pulling each notice down one by one while the sycamore swayed overhead like it was trying not to laugh. It was Karen's last stand, and it was made of cardstock and desperation. By noon, I had all the notices scanned, cataloged, and forwarded to my attorney, along with a cease and desist letter I'd received just an hour earlier, this one typed in Comic Sans, as if that would make it more terrifying. The letter accused me of slander, inciting rebellion, and endangering the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. My lawyer's reply was blunt. Tell her to bring it. That letter's a legal donut. Looks serious until you bite into it. I didn't reply to Karen directly. Instead, I submitted a certified request for the HOA's legal registration documents, its meeting records, and its financial audits. That alone was enough to make most fake HOAs collapse under the weight of their own bluff. But I had something else, a little card I'd been holding close. Months ago, before I even moved in, my father had transferred an old proxy vote agreement into my name, an obscure clause buried in the Birch Hollow land covenants. I now held voting authority on behalf of 3 original parcel owners, 2 of whom had since passed away, and 1 who'd moved to Arizona but never rescinded his proxy. When added to my own vote, that gave me a majority block of 51%, silent but legally binding. With that, I had the power to dissolve the current HOA and initiate the formation of a new, democratically structured community council. I scheduled a new meeting at the Lakefront Pavilion, neutral ground with no HOAC on the doors. Word spread fast. By 6:00 p.m., more than 30 residents showed up, most carrying folding chairs and stories of Karen's reign. I opened with facts, not accusations. I projected the original 1974 exemption clause, the proxy records, and the lack of state registration. This doesn't have to be about punishment, I said. It can be about a fresh start. The proposal was simple: dissolve the current HOA, return all pending violation fines, and hold transparent elections to form a new board. All decisions would require 75% approval, and no single person could override the vote. A few folks hesitated, unsure. Then Rachel raised her hand. I second the motion, she said. And if Karen wants my rain barrels back, she can pry them from my cold compost-covered hands. The vote was taken on the spot. Of the 32 residents present, 28 voted yes. 3 abstained, 1 voted no, and even he asked afterward if we could reduce the quarterly fees. It was done. Birch Hollow's HOA, the one built on threat letters, fake bylaws, and whispered rumors, was officially out. As the sun set over the lake, people lingered. For the first time since I'd arrived, neighbors weren't just nodding polite. They were laughing, swapping stories, offering help, and in the corner, Curtis stood beside the grill flipping burgers like nothing unusual had happened. He caught my eye and tipped his tongs. You sure cracked open a hornet's nest, he said. Let's just hope the queen doesn't come back with stingers. I smiled, but deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't retreat quietly, not with property pride and a payout on the line. The queen didn't stay quiet for long. 2 days after the vote, an urgent update hit every resident's inbox, except mine. Karen had called for a counter meeting at the community center, claiming legal counsel advised immediate action to reassert HOA authority over recent unlawful gatherings. Attached was a suspiciously formal letter signed by someone named J. Reynolds, legal advisor, which, when I Googled, turned out to be a part-time notary from Barre, Vermont. Still, the tactic was clear: bluff with jargon, bulldoze with fear. I texted the group we'd formed post-vote and suggested anyone curious should attend. Witnessing is free, I wrote. Just don't drink the Kool-Aid. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat in the back again. The community center was already half full, and Karen was front and center in a new power suit, one that still couldn't hide the coffee stain running across the hem. She stood beside a man who looked like he hadn't slept since Y2K, introduced as counsel for the association. No credentials, no firm name. He mumbled about emergency enforcement under Clause 7.3 while avoiding eye contact with everyone. Karen then motioned to a slide reading, immediate vote to reclaim authority over Lot 17B. She launched into a speech that ping-ponged between paranoia and martyrdom. He came here to destabilize us. Birch Hollow has always stood for order, for shared values. This isn't about trees. This is about infiltration. It was the kind of speech you'd expect from a cult leader during a budget meeting. I let her talk. I let the so-called attorney fumble through 3 more slides. Then, when they opened the floor for procedural commentary, I stood and walked to the front. Since I seemed to be the guest of honor, I thought I'd clarify a few things. I laid down the certified property deeds, original covenants, and a fresh printout from the Vermont Department of Housing, confirming once again that the Birch Hollow HOA had no legal registration. Then I held up a letter. signed and notarized by the remaining original parcel owners, officially transferring shared easement rights to the new resident-led council. That means the lakefront paths, the roads, the shared boat dock. You're using land now governed by a legally recognized community board, not an unregistered club with a mailing list and a clip art logo. Karen turned white, the fake attorney turned green, and the room turned quiet until Curtis raised his hand and said, "So just to clarify, if we vote on something under the new council, it actually means something?" I nodded. "And nobody's getting fined for mailbox color?" "Not unless your mailbox starts blasting country music at 3 a.m. Laughter broke out across the room, light but real. Karen, seething, gathered her things and bolted for the door. She reached it, she turned back and hissed, "You think this is over? I built Birch Hollow." But her heel caught on the edge of the rug and she stumbled, spilling her oversized tote, which unleashed a cascade of violation forms, a half-eaten banana, and what looked like a branded Hickory Ridge pen. The door slammed behind her like punctuation. In the weeks that followed, things changed quickly. Residents helped repaint the dock without being told what color it had to be. Meredith led a finance transparency subcommittee. Even Mr. Kessler smiled more, which was downright unsettling. Then came the letter, this one from the state prosecutor's office. An official investigation had been opened into fraud, financial misconduct, and attempted unlawful transfer of community assets. Aaron's name was listed as a primary party of interest. I didn't cheer. I didn't even pour a celebratory drink. Instead, I walked out to the sycamore, sat down on the bench my father built, and watched the light flicker off the lake. Justice wasn't loud. Sometimes it was a tree no one could touch. A month later, on Community Cleanup Day, I spotted a familiar figure in an orange vest scraping gum off the dock railings. Karen, now part of her own court-mandated restitution, avoided eye contact as she bent to collect a crushed soda can beside the bench. I nodded politely. She didn't nod back, and that was fine, because as I stood to water the sycamore, I noticed someone had hung a little wooden sign on the tree. This tree outlasted tyranny. Birch Hollow wasn't perfect, but it was finally ours. Sometimes all it takes to bring down a fake empire is one stubborn neighbor, a tree, and a backup generator. Karen built her power on silence, intimidation, and a folder full of nonsense bylaws, until the community realized none of it meant anything without their consent. Birch Hollow didn't need a tyrant with a clipboard. It needed a reminder that power only sticks when people stop asking questions. The truth is, when you stand up with facts, receipts, and just a little bit of sarcasm, even the loudest president will eventually trip over her own rule book. So here's to holding the line, planting your roots, and knowing exactly how deep they go. Have you ever had to fight back against HOA craziness? Drop your wildest Karen moment in the comments, because you might just be next on Tree Spot TV. Don't forget to like, share, and water your metaphorical sycamores.